Continuing in our color correction series, we'll be covering how to do color balancing in Adobe Premiere. Oftentimes, we need to do color balancing because either the camera was not white balanced correctly or something in the scene is affecting the color temperature in a way that we're given a color cast. Let's look at some examples of what I mean. In the first example, the camera was balanced for daylight when in fact it should have been balanced for tungsten, giving our image a strong warm color cast. In the next example, the opposite is true, where the camera was balanced for tungsten when in fact it should have been balanced for daylight, giving our image a cool color cast. In both cases, the problem has resulted from camera operator error. In other situations, the camera operator may have intentionally dialed the white balance overly warm or overly cool, but now the director has decided to reduce the cast. Either way, it's not a big deal because we can fix it in post. And in the last example, we have a shot exhibiting a green color cast. Fluorescent lighting found in office environments is attributed to a green color cast, which is likely the reason for the problem in this shot. Like many tasks in the Lumetri color panel, these issues can be fixed in a variety of different ways. Specifically, there are 4 main ways to adjust color balance. The first is to use the white balance color picker in the basic corrections panel. The second, to use the temperature and tint controls found just below the white balance color picker. The third, to use the color wheels. And the fourth, to use curves. We'll try out all 4 methods as we go through this lesson. The white balance color picker is perhaps the easiest to use and is really straightforward. All we simply need to do is to click on the eyedropper and then find something that is white in the scene and click on it. This automatically applies a white balance correction. It is important, however, to keep in mind that we want to be able to apply logic because not everything is actually a true white. So that's just something to consider. Now the temperature controls adjust the color temperature in degrees Kelvin. Pulling to the right will increase the warmth in the image, while pulling to the left will decrease the warmth. Put simply, this control will adjust the image along the yellow to blue spectrum. I'm going to cool off the image by pulling the temperature control to the left. This control maxes out at -100, so if we needed, we could use the other panels to assist us. In this case, I think that's looking better. It just looks a little green. We can then adjust the tint control, which makes adjustments to the green to magenta spectrum. I'll pull the tint control to the right to add some magenta. The shot still feels warm, but it's a pleasing warmth, creating natural looking skin tones. If we were to add more blue to the shot, we'd run the risk of making the shot look too clinical. Okay, let's move to the next shot and make corrections using the color wheels panel. Color temperature adjustments apply to the image in a top-down fashion, meaning that if you apply a correction to the highlights, it will also apply slight corrections to the rest of the tonal range going into the midtones and shadows. In many cases, you can just use the highlight control to fix the color temperature, but in this case, we're going to need to use all 3 color controls because of the severity of the blue cast in this image. Before we make our adjustment, I want to give you a tip that can be helpful if you're new to color balancing. When you make your adjustments using the color controls, I suggest that you limit your motions in up, down, and left to right movements. Moving diagonally can lead to what's called stirring the pot, like this. But once you get more comfortable with making adjustments along the cyan red and green magenta spectrum, you can start to introduce diagonal movements. Alright, the scope that we're going to use to help us with white balancing or fixing color temperature is the RGB parade scope. What we then want to do is find a white reference in the image and identify the corresponding trace in the RGB parade, but sometimes that can be challenging to read, so I'm going to use the mask tools to isolate a white and black reference in our shot so this is much easier to see. For white, we'll use the man's shirt in the background, and for black, we'll use the man's black hair in the foreground. I'll double click the clip and open the effect controls. Let's turn off the opacity effect, then click on the pen, and draw a shape to isolate the shirt, and then a shape to isolate the man's hair. Then we'll turn the opacity effects back on. Now we can clearly see those 2 regions in the RGB parade. We'll start with the highlights and use the man's white shirt in the background as a white reference. Our goal here is to get the trace here to line up evenly going straight across. So I'll start by dragging to the left in the gain control and then straight up until the trace and the red, green, and blue channels appear in a straight line. When the 3 color channels line up evenly in a straight line, we've achieved a neutral color balance. Alright, the whites are looking good, so let's balance the blacks. Using the shadow control, I'll add warm colors until these parts of the trace align. Okay, now let's go into the effect controls and turn off the opacity effects. This is looking pretty good, but maybe still a bit too cool for what should look like a sunny outdoor shot. Let's add some warmth with the midtones control. Looking good. Let's try this correction a different way using the curves. Let's turn off our color wheels correction by clicking here, and then open the curves panel. Using the custom curves, we can get precise control over the exposure for the red, green, and blue channels. And I also want to point out that all the channels are linked or ganged together, which means when we make an adjustment to one, it affects all the others equally. So in order to access each individual channel, all you have to do is to click the specific channel that you want to work with. So again, to make it easier, let's turn on our opacity effects. Then open the scopes. Then click on the blue channel, then drag down on the top point for the highlights to subtract blue. Then add more red by clicking the red channel and dragging the top point to the left. For the shadows, we'll go back to the blue channel and drag the bottom point to the right. And then to balance the red in the shadows, we'll click the red channel and drag the bottom point up. Then we'll go back to our effect controls and turn the opacity controls off. Again, we could use some mid-tone warmth, so I'll click the blue channel, make a point in the middle for the mid-range, and drag down. That looks great. We got similar results with both sets of controls, so it's totally up to you and your personal preference which one you prefer. Let's move to our last example with a green color cast caused by fluorescent office lighting. We'll use the temperature and tint method as well as the curves method. We'll start with the temperature and tint controls in the basics panel. Since the tint control makes adjustments along the green magenta spectrum, we'll drag the tint control to the right until the parts of the three traces representing the white strip on the wall align. And then I'll just make a small change to the temperature control. That was fast. Okay, now for practice, let's correct the shot with the curves. Now what I suggest that you do here is that you pause the video and you try to correct this yourself using the curves. But if you do need some help, just come back and resume the video. Okay, so let's do this together. We can correct the color balance issue a few different ways with the curves. Both require the same number of steps, so it will be up to you how you'd like to approach the correction. Since we have elevated green levels in the highlights, we can click on the green channel, click on the top point, and drag down to subtract or reduce green in the tonal range. Definitely better, but the three channels don't quite align properly on the white reference. Let's click on the red channel, click on the top point, and drag to the left to bring the red up. Okay, looking good. Let's try it a different way. Here's a key tip. If you want to reset a curves correction, just double click on the curves. I'll also need to do this for the green channel, so I'll click on that channel and double click in the middle. Okay, so another way we can achieve a neutral white balance is to increase the exposure of the red and blue channels. I'll click on the blue channel and drag the top point to the left to bring up the blue, and then click the red channel and do the same until the channels align. That looks good and maybe even a touch better than the previous method. The only real difference between the two methods we used is the change in exposure. It is more intuitive to use the green channel since we're correcting for a green color cast, but we also significantly reduce the exposure in the image since a lot of the luma information is in the green channel. The second method fixed the color balance while simultaneously increased the overall exposure. So in summary, it's good that you become familiar with the different ways of approaching correcting the white balance. If you do choose to lower the green channel, you may need to brighten the image after the fact to restore it to its previous exposure. In conclusion, there are a number of ways that we can perform color balance corrections, and I suggest that you choose whichever method gives you the best results in the shortest amount of time possible. Well, I hope this tutorial has helped you with understanding how to white balance or correct color temperature issues in your footage. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to respond. Thanks for watching.